Hi, my name is Steve Ziemba. I am the social media manager at Midwestern University. Thank you for joining me today for my talk on hook, line, and reel, engaging prospective students with short form stories. A little bit about stories in terms of your content intentions, right? And it's always important for me to understand, or at least define, your why, your who, and your what. So your why in this case really acts as your North Star that provides direction for the content you're creating. In this case, we're creating content that we believe is responsible for delivering first and lasting impressions. And then secondly, based on that, our audience should feel connected, inspired, engaged by the content we produce. It's important to have a strong why because it allows you to say no to random acts of content request. If you ever work in social media for an organization, you'll get a lot of requests from different departments saying, hey, can you post this to social media? By having a strong why, it allows you to say no because we have this specific purpose in mind. Now, with that in mind, we also want to define our audience. Who are we trying to reach? In this case, in terms of prospective students, we really look at Gen Z as being our target audience, and that's traditionally defined by this group of individuals born between the late 1990s and early 2010s. They're roughly between 14 and 24-ish, I would say, years of age. They're also sort of defined by, they're career oriented. They have very career oriented goals. They're defined as digital native. These are individuals that have grown up in knowing nothing but social media and the internet. They've always been connected in terms of a generation. They're used to short form content. They like that short form content. They engage with that content. And the other thing is that they're really into content that kind of represents brand authenticity. How can you represent yourself in an authentic way on social media that's not overly polished or produced, but that's sort of what I call rough and ready, just that shows your brand in an authentic way. So if we have a defined why and we know who our audience is, if we put those things two together, it should equal the what, which is that we drive engaging content or produce engaging content that brings the Midwestern University culture to life via these shareable stories. It helps drive brand awareness among prospective students that ultimately leads to discovery, consideration, and increased commitment actions, and then increased engagement among current social communities. So that's really the measurable stuff, right? The increased commitments, which is visits, it's applications, it's requests for more information. And then the engagement as well is very measurable. Comments, questions, shares, saves, and as well as followers. So the question is, based on our why and our who and our what, is the where. Where do we want to play in this space? As you can see from this chart, social media usage is increasing for all generations. However, it is increasing most quickly for Generation Z. In 2024, US Gen Z social media usage will grow 7.7% versus 1.8% for the general population. And this is according to eMarketer's May 2024 forecast. So based on what we know of Gen Z and where they're hanging out, these are our primary content channels to deliver our short form stories. It's YouTube, it's Instagram, and it's TikTok. These are the ones that we know we can create content for and do so in a meaningful way. So having defined the why, the who, the what, and the where, the when comes into play, right? When is the content that we're creating, these short form stories, when is it most appropriate? And I look at stories really in a simple way. There's emotive stories, which are narrative stories that are more about the who and the why and the how. And then there's these logical stories, which are more declarative stories. They're more about the what, the where, and the why. So emotive is really about capturing attention and drawing an audience into who you are and what you believe as an institution, and how do you communicate that through short form stories. The logical or declarative stories, you see a lot of university websites that are sort of littered with these logical stories or declarative stories, which isn't a bad thing. And in fact, it could be quite helpful. And that could be content that's further down the funnel. Like when students need a little bit more information, when they're undecided about where they want to go to school in the future, this can sort of help them kind of push them to the next level. And I always like to think of those declarative stories about, these are stories about faculty, facilities, location, technology, and culture versus sort of those emotive stories. So in terms of narrative versus these declarative stories, Kurt Vonnegut always had this way of talking about stories in terms of them being or having a shape. So when we think about emotives and the shape of those stories are usually shaped sort of like a roller coaster ride, right? There's a purpose, there's a hook, there's tension, there's insight, and there's a resolution. So when we're creating stories, we want to capture an emotion. And again, stories should be more that roller coaster ride that hooks people. Now, when you think about those logical declarative stories, those are more focused on details. And the shape of those stories is sort of more like a conveyor belt of information, right? It's very demure, it's very mindful, it's very modest in terms of storytelling. So when we're looking at our story types, we're looking at these primary hooks or these archetypes, right? And there's a couple here, and I'll walk you through some of ours that we focus on. And the first one is on thought leadership. In addition to Midwestern University, we have a clinic component that our students go to actually practice what they're learning on real patients. So what we're doing in this space is to shine the light on some of our subject matter experts to just bring that culture to life and just show them, hey, I've gotten to this level. Here's what I know now that is positioning to be an expert in the future. I think the person on the street, you see probably quite a bit of this as well from other colleges, and this works really well in terms of hooking students or at least drawing them into our stories. The person on the street, again, I like to think of these as sort of rough and ready, right? They're unscripted content. It gives you real feels about the campus and the type of students that attend our university. The third one is campus vibes. And I think everyone gets this right to some extent, right? The campus vibes is a great hook because we get real perspectives from real students. And this allows prospective students to visualize themselves on campus in the future. Some additional hooks or archetypes that we're looking at as well is techs and kind of technology in labs, I should say. So with our university, we got some great technology, and we'd like to spotlight that. And some of this content does really well. It really draws students in and piques their interest. So bringing that really cool technology to life is sort of like getting a sneak behind the scenes to see how the sausage is made, so to speak, right? It draws you in and says, hey, that's really cool. I could picture myself there. I think another archetype here is that day in the life, which is one of those, again, in terms of that roller coaster ride of a story. The day in the life is great because it has a specific start and it has a conclusion. And these type of stories do exceptionally well across our short form story content telling opportunities. And the students are great because a lot of times we just work with the students. They provide us content that we edit on the back end. And we just get tremendous engagement on these day in the life stories. And then the last one here is anything that's really event based. An event based content is really an emotional capture, right? You capture the emotion of the moment, the time, the achievement, and not only from the student's perspective, but you get students, family, faculty, really everyone is rooting for you to succeed and take your career to that next level. So the last thing I would say in terms of creating these stories and archetypes is that when people visit your account, whether it's on YouTube, it's on Instagram, it's on TikTok, is to be mindful of your design aesthetic, right? Not everyone's always going to see your content in the moment, but they may see a piece of content, come back to your page and say, hey, what other stories have they shared in the past that might be of interest to me? And they could actually, by your design aesthetic, see additional stories and draw them into those stories. With YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram, they automatically select a visual thumbnail that isn't always appealing or is going to draw someone into the story. I would say in summary, in terms of your hook line and your reel, we always try to keep in mind, what do we want our audience to think? What do we want them to feel? And what do we want them to do?
Awesome. Thank you. Sorry for the delay
Yep.
there.
I don't know how the timing is
Hitting
on that.
hitting unmute and
5 to
nothing
10
happened.
minutes.
Um, I won't say how I felt about it. Why don't you
Yep.
say how you felt about it?
It's hard for me to, I feel like it went pretty good with a few little stumbles here and there. But I mean, overall, I feel like the energy was good.
Yeah.
I
No, I
feel like
didn't.
you made some
Just
good points. So,
I didn't want to influence your own opinion of yourself and your own talk, but no,
okay.
I thought it
I
was
have a
great.
tendency to talk with my hands, so I don't know if that's distracting.
Uh, what was the social media platforms? I can't, it's hard for me to pull up the slides, Steve, but maybe you could just comment on which ones were the most popular.
Yeah, for us, I think sort of in order of popularity, it's Instagram, and TikTok and YouTube Shorts sort of fight it out. You know, sometimes we get more views on YouTube Shorts than we do on TikTok, and vice versa. But we seem to be pretty consistent on engagement on Instagram Reels, and I think that's because we've been in them playing in that space for a longer period of time, and we just have a stronger following there.
And people are curious about if you should include links after the reel to learn more, and where do you usually send people, or how do you handle links?
You know, I don't necessarily include links in any of our stories, right? Because it's meant to be sort of absorbed in that moment. And I don't find that a lot of people are clicking away after they've watched that story to go read the description in full, right?
Yeah.
Not to say that it's not a good best practice to do, but I just would say don't expect that you're going to get a lot of clicks on that, because people are there for the story to absorb it and move on, right?
Right.
Maybe they'll expand and read the description, but a lot of people aren't clicking away from those platforms to then, read the larger story at length.
Awesome. And then really any difference that you're seeing kind of demographically between undergraduates, graduate enrollment, so probably people who are 17, 18 versus people who are in their mid 20s to mid 30s, any changes in how you think about what kind of content is most appealing to those folks?
Yeah, it's funny because, we, for Midwestern University, we are sort of, undergraduate institutions are sort of the filter for our university, since we're higher education, right? So the students that come here have already completed their undergrad, and they've taken that next level. I think in terms of the content from an undergrad versus kind of the higher ed medical university, what I see is, and again, this isn't a bad thing, but I see undergraduate universities jumping on a lot of trends, using a lot of trending audio, music, and things of that nature, which I think is fine. But we don't want to necessarily play in that space. We want to focus on our stories and how we tell them, and not necessarily jump on the trends. And again, it's not a bad thing, but in my mind, people remember the trend and not necessarily who kind of put it out there, right?
Yeah.
And you'll say, well, oh, that was a great trend. I don't remember who put it out there, but I remember the trend, and not necessarily the brand or university connected to that trend, especially when everyone's jumping on it. So I think it works really well from an undergraduate perspective. We'll do it. Maybe we'll see trends, but we'll try to add our own spin to it, so it doesn't look like we're just kind of piggybacking off of something that we've seen online and just creating something that's kind of a lather, rinse, repeat.
Excellent. Thank you again. This is super helpful information. We just finished some survey work, and I saw the raw data this week, and seeing those sort of same platforms, I think, are still growing in popularity, especially, YouTube for communicating, and the ones you're highlighting there. So I think we're continuing to see that as a trend as well. So thank you for presenting, and thanks for your time.
I appreciate it. Thank you.